are 62 days before the election, weeks away from early voting in some states, and 8 days away from the Trump-Kamala debate on ABC. Maybe. So when the hell will they stop shielding Kamala from herself? The show starts now. So last week, we finally got that long-awaited first interview, maybe the last, with Kamala and her emotional support, Valor stealing running mate Tim Walz. And yes, while our expectations were low, CNN, Dana Bash, Kamala, and Tim delivered Olympic-level performance limbo. They lowered the bar, if that were possible. But now the Kamala campaign is back to doing what it does best: evasion. You know, I gotta hand it to the Kamala campaign. They are certainly creative with their tactics. This appears to be the latest press avoidance strategy: headphones. Oh yes, the old "I'm on an important phone call and cannot be bothered" shtick. You know, it's quite obvious this was a choreographed performance. She's using old-fashioned headphones, probably so she could hear better, maybe for top secret reasons, or perhaps to make her important phone call more noticeable. This is the same strategy we've all used to avoid conversing with airplane row mates and the like. If someone can visibly see you're listening to something, maybe they won't bother you. And that's fine for you and me, but it's not so cute when you're the Democrat presidential candidate who was tagged in 100 days before an election and is either unwilling or totally incapable of answering questions. Kamala has been phoning it in for nearly 4 years now, and for damn sure the last 40 days. But she's not the only one. Yesterday, America's workers celebrated a day off for Labor Day. But Joe Biden, well, he celebrated his 16th straight day off on vacation on Saturday. So who is running our country? I didn't vote for Joe Biden, but nobody voted for the shadow figure who's running our country now and likely has been for a good 3 years. And when he did return to work, or I guess not really work, but rather a campaign stop for Kamala, well, this is what we got.
You can no longer be the manufacturing capital of the world. Where the hell is that written? We are the greatest manufacturing city, county in the world, state in the world, city in the world. We're going to remain that way.
Not all there, but still perhaps more impressive than Kamala. The mask has fallen and Democrats think so little of you and I, they don't even care to hide it anymore. And I have a big problem with that. But I'm wondering how my next guest feels. Joining me now is Democrat and attorney Ethan Bearman. Ethan, it's great to have you. I have so many questions. It's always great to have a Democrat on the line.
Well, Tomi, look, we've known each other for many years now, and I always welcome the opportunity to have a conversation with you and feel that we have a level of, while we disagree on most political topics, I think that there's a level of mutual respect between us as well, so we can have the conversation.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you always being so open to dialogue. I do have a lot of questions for you, though, and I know you're not a Kamala campaign surrogate, but I assume you're probably going to vote for Kamala. So I want to ask you a couple of things. First of all, were you impressed with that interview performance last week? And you got to be honest with me, is that enough to give the American voter ahead of an election?
Well, I think there's a lot in your question there. And let me start, Tomi, by saying, do I think that kind of an interview really moves the needle either way, or is it really just something for us to have a good debate about? I wasn't terribly impressed. I think Kamala is much better at speaking to the crowds, a little bit like your guy, where he's better at speaking to crowds than he is in interviews. She'll get better at it. She hasn't done a lot of them yet. But look, ultimately, it's coming down to this. Does an interview move the needle? No. It did with Joe Biden in the first debate. You guys got what you wanted. He stepped out of the race and said he's not going to run for re-election. Whereas your guy, who still fumbles on the words at every single rally and in interviews, is still almost 80 years old and having issues as well. Kamala Harris is able to form sentences that are cohesive and coherent, even if you disagree with them. So that's kind of where I stand on it.
Well, she is capable of forming sentences. We just haven't heard a lot of impromptu sentences, extemporaneous sentences from Kamala. Now, here's my thing about it. I don't really care how she performs in front of a rally, and I don't even care how she comes across in an interview. I think the biggest thing about that interview that burned my biscuits and rubbed me the wrong way is that she has been avoiding answering for her record, or at least her past beliefs that she firmly held. You're in California. You well know Kamala in California as a senator, and also a wide variety of other offices that she has held in that state. And she also ran for president not too long ago. 4 years ago, she ran for president. She didn't even make it to, 2020, I don't believe. I think she dropped out very early. But she had a number of positions that were certainly far to the left, and far more left than Joe Biden, or really most of the people on that stage. So I think that although we did get some questions about her past record, I don't know if she gave a sufficient answer as to why she's moved away from her past positions in terms of fracking, in terms of other Green New Deal climate change initiatives. Do you think that she's given us enough answers on her policy changes?
Well, I don't know if she's given us enough answers. I think that that's a fair criticism that can be asked of why did you change your mind on these things? I think this is a fundamental difference, though, between Democrats and at least the present Republican base, which is, as new facts come in, we modify our positions. That's science as well. When new data comes in, we have to respond and react accordingly. So we look back, for example, I know people on both ends of the spectrum attack Kamala Harris for her time as Attorney General and DA in San Francisco, which, by the way, Donald Trump loved San Francisco in 2013 when Gavin Newsom was mayor and Kamala Harris was the DA. But I think we would want to know what has changed, why she's changed her position. I think that that's a fair question. I think in the case of fracking and climate change, I think it's the reality on the ground that you have goals and ideals, which is how quickly can we move off of hydrocarbon that's polluting, that's causing a variety of issues in our world right now, yet balance out the need for a transition period. Look, the Inflation Reduction Act is creating huge investments in the United States. And I think that she's following Joe Biden's lead on that one, which was, hey, oil production's never been higher in the history of any country in the world than it has been under Joe Biden. And recognizing that reality, I think, is important. And possibly that's why she's shifted her position.
Well, you said that, but she had an opportunity to say that, and she didn't. She told Dana Bash that her values are still the same, but she wouldn't ban fracking. So if she would have given the answer that you just gave me, saying, hey, listen, I would love to move away from fossil fuels, but that's not the reality right now. I've learned that. I don't want the hardworking people of Pennsylvania to be put out of work. I would have respected that answer, and I think that that answer actually would have done well for her, but that's not what she said. She said that her values are still the same. It's very abstract. We always get these abstract answers from Kamala where she doesn't actually address the point. You just did. She seems incapable of that. Same thing when it comes to the border. She said that she believes in the bipartisan border bill. Well, that border bill includes funding for a wall, which she was so ferociously against. Really, 2017, 2018, 2019, she was so against a wall, but now she's open to a wall. She didn't tell us why she's now open for a wall, and she didn't tell us why now that certain benchmarks for immigration are acceptable to her. So we don't really get a lot of the why behind it. Do you think she needs to do another sit-down interview, and this time without Tim Walz next to her?
Well, look, I look forward to Kamala Harris having that sit-down interview. I think you brought up something, though, Tommy. If it's okay, I want to address this. I think this is really important. I think if you look at why a lot of people are frustrated by politics in general, is because politicians have a tendency, and it's why I'm not running for any office, by the way. Politicians have a tendency to want to give whatever is politically expedient for an answer, whatever is going to cause the least amount of controversy, to pool their base for voting. And that's something that I know over the years, you and I have had our share of frustrations with our own respective sides, where it's like, we can handle the truth. We like to know what's really going on. We want to understand where you really stand on issues. We're not interested in being sold something just to, not offend this small demographic sliver of our base, for example. And, I think as Midwesterners originally, both of us, we have a shared set of core values that make us Americans across the board, and we have our disagreements over how to get there. And that's what frustrates us with politics a lot. And I don't mean to be speaking for you in any way, but I know that we have some of those shared values. So yeah, I would love to hear Kamala Harris explain, hey, I don't want to ban fracking now because in California, that was popular. That was a strong move. But when you look at the country as a whole, look, there's a lot of jobs. There's a lot of people's retirements that are dependent on the hydrocarbon industries. We can't just phase it out tomorrow for as much as the environmental left wants that to happen. Politicians just don't give us those kinds of straight answers. They just don't.
No, and I think that it leads to a lot of us fearful that she would say and do anything to get elected. But then as soon as she was elected, she would again push the radical Green New Deal policies that would put people out of work in Pennsylvania. But to your point there, one thing I think we can both agree on with Donald Trump is that he really doesn't care if he offends people, and he says things that are controversial. I don't think he plays it like a politician at all. When he says, I'm going to have mass deportations, that's not necessarily a popular thing to say. It's a controversial thing to say, surely, but he at least says it. So to me, Donald Trump is at least more authentic, whether you like it or not. He kind of tells you this is what I'm going to do, and he doesn't really care if it bothers people or rubs people the wrong way. So I give him more credit for that, even if people don't agree with everything that he says. But I want to ask you also, you mentioned that you're a former Midwesterner, and I think that the Kamala campaign is really relying on Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to appeal to maybe people like you and I. I'm curious if he appeals to you. Do you think he was the right choice?
Oddly, he wasn't my first choice for her VP pick. And in the end, I think he absolutely was. As a native Minnesotan, of course, I very much recognize Tim Walz and kind of his behavior and what he thinks and how he thinks. And it's very traditional in the Midwest, where he's a little different, is he really has pushed in ways that Minnesotans have a lot over the years, which is, hey, look, we don't want kids to be hungry. Let's make sure they have food at school. We want people of lower income to have the ability to go to state schools. Some might call that progressive. Some on the right might call that socialist. I see that as logical, that people have the opportunities to get the basics in their lives. I understand why certain people on the right absolutely don't like Tim Walz. I think that they have their positions that are probably valid criticisms of him, but he's been a popular governor. He's won overwhelmingly in the gubernatorial races in Minnesota. He did win a red district when he was a congressman. He does have those basic values. He's not anti-gun. He wants reasonable and rational gun laws. He's a hunter. I've been hunting. I've fired many weapons, right? We've had these conversations. In the end, I think he's the right balance for Kamala Harris to show that she's not just some coastal liberal elite. I mean, actually, I think that's Donald Trump more nowadays, right? I mean, while you said he speaks his mind, I do agree with you. And he's also shown himself to pick favorites when it comes to business. I think mass deportations that you brought up are a terrible idea, because businesses, especially the restaurant food industry, the hospitality industry, the agriculture business, depends on a lot of immigrant labor. But we need to come up with rational, reasonable solutions and functioning visa programs for those workers to be able to fill the jobs that need to be filled.
Well, I think a lot of blue-collar American workers are probably pretty concerned about the 10 million illegals that have come in under the Biden-Harris administration. If they are given work authorization, which many of them already have, taken a lot of jobs from Americans, and also living on our dime in hotels and shelters and elsewhere, feeding off our system and our health care. It's unsustainable. It's going to break America. You know that. I know that. But to Tim Walz, you and I are obviously very different. I'm from South Dakota. You're from Minnesota. Minnesota and South Dakota couldn't be more different. In South Dakota, we probably wouldn't let our city burn to the ground during the summer of love. We wouldn't report our neighbors for COVID violations. That's not really a South Dakota value. I don't know if it's a Minnesota value either, but it's a Tim Walz value. I do have to ask you, though, about his answer. He had to have been prepping for the stolen Valor question from Dana Bash at CNN. He had to have been prepping for that for weeks because it's been a controversy. I'm going to play his answer, and you tell me if you think he put it to rest.
I think people know me. They know who I am. They know where my heart is. And again, My record has been out there for over 40 years to speak for itself.
And the idea that you said that you were in war,
Yeah.
did you misspeak as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar is not always correct.
Listen, I love English and I love grammar. I'm not so sure misspeaking about your time spent in the military is a grammar issue. Ethan, is it?
Well, I think it could be. And I'm not trying to say that I know what was in his mind or not, but to say that I carried weapons of war versus I was in war. Look, there's a long history of politicians, including Republicans, including the VP candidate for the Republican Party right now, including one of the key senators, Tom Cotton. People misspeak about their military record. The key is are you doing it intentionally to mislead people? Are you lying about your history? Look, we know that Tim Walz was in the Army National Guard for 20 years. He did rise to the rank, a very difficult rank to achieve as a non-commissioned officer. He served honorably, all of these things. So if he misspoke, look, I hate that happens. I even misspeak periodically. I even misspeak sometimes in front of a judge and go, "Oh, Your Honor, I'm so sorry. I meant to say this." But the point is that a material misrepresentation? I don't think it is. I think his heart is in the right place. I think his service record shows that it's in the right place. I think, look, you're valid to point out the criticism there. And it sounds like, he partially, if not fully, accepts that criticism. But I come down to, does he know what our military is going to need? Look, I think this is an area where you and I really do come into much more alignment. We are facing very, very serious challenges on the global stage right now, between China, between Russia. We just had this huge incident in Turkey yesterday of attacking U.S. troops on the street. We have huge geopolitical challenges facing us. We've got to pull together as a country and recognize, look, bad people on the world stage are our essentially enemies, and we've got to focus on how do we defeat them, and where we can we pull together so we show a unified country in face of these challenges.
I don't disagree with you on that point. But again, you also did the speaking for Tim Walz that he could have done, but he chose not to, and he had to have been prepared for that question. And if he wasn't, that to me calls into question whether he's prepared for anything, because he knew that he was going to get it, and I don't think that he answered it well enough. I personally am not one of the Republicans or conservatives that cares that much about the stolen valor or the IVF comments, or I don't really care about any of that. To me, that's semantics, and it doesn't impact my life in the least. But I do think that he was completely unprepared for the most preparable question possible, and he failed, in my opinion. Also thought it was awkward that he was even there. He didn't need to be there. She could have done it on her own. At least you'd hope so. But you brought up things on the world stage, which brings me to my next question for you. Joe Biden was asked by reporters what he thinks about what's going on in Israel and what's going on with Hamas. We lost more hostages, as we know, devastating. But when Biden was asked about it, if Netanyahu is doing enough, this was his response.
Mr. President, if you think it's time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more on this issue, do you think he's doing enough?
No.
Mr. President, what is your reaction to the demonstrations across Israel? What is your reaction to the demonstrations?
I'm going to get the detail when I walk in, and I'll talk to you after that, okay?
Do you think his answer was helpful in making Israel feel supported by the U.S.?
No. So I will be right up front with you. I am Jewish. I am pro-Israel. My first trip to Israel was during Operation Protective Edge during the war in 2014. I went and covered it live as a radio correspondent across the United States and on live shows. It changed my mind about Israel to see things firsthand and what goes on there, and to meet people across the spectrum. I'm not the biggest fan of Bibi Netanyahu. I thought those alleged court reforms are a terrible idea for a democracy. I think that far too many people on the left are absolutely ignorant to the idea that in Israel and where else across the Middle East can hundreds of thousands of people gather to protest against their government. It doesn't happen. They get murdered, slaughtered, sent to jail, put in gulags, tortured, whatever, by basically any other government in the Middle East and that entire region. And Israel is the one beacon of liberty and democracy and freedom in the Middle East. I think that Israel has to do whatever it's going to take to defend themselves. 0.2% of the world population is Jewish. Israel is the only place for Jewish people exclusively that they have full rights and are openly defended and supported in the entire world. The United States, of course, is our other home besides Israel, and we're very safe and comfortable here, although, that's come under a lot of question since October 7th. But I give no quarter to terrorists who murder, who rape, who slaughter, who abuse, who behead, who torture elderly, children, women, and literally raping women to death, and then executing them as the IDF is about to come and rescue them. I have no place for them. And terrorists that want to attack U.S. troops in civilian clothing on the streets, I have no place for them. I become a very, very right-wing type person when it comes to the idea of terrorism. And that is something that you and I think, have talked about a lot over the years. I have no place for fascists who want to use their religion to impose at the end of violent acts to convert or kill others because they don't believe what they believe. I absolutely support your right to believe and practice your religion as you see fit, Tomi. I want the freedom to do the same. That's why I love the United States of America. That's why I love our First Amendment. That's why I volunteered to join our military. I mean, there is much to be said about our freedoms and how important they are, and I want to maintain those freedoms, and I want to support others who believe in those freedoms as well.
I respect your position and I agree with it. But this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, they've been playing some games when it comes to their support for Israel, even if they have material support for Israel in terms of weapons and financing. I think they haven't been loud enough in their condemnation of not only Hamas, but the people in our streets in New York City and in LA, at UCLA and in USC, that are going around waving Hamas flags, not allowing Jewish students to enter areas of the campus. And then they had the protest right outside of the DNC that was barely acknowledged by Democrats and certainly barely acknowledged by Kamala, if she even addressed it at all. And then I thought it was interesting watching the DNC, a flashback there, when Kamala did address it in her speech. She talked about support for Israel, didn't really hear a lot of cheers. But then when she talked about the Palestinians, there was a thunderous applause. Do you think that your party needs to do more for some moral and mental clarity here?
Yes. And sorry to be so clear in my answer, Tomi, but I have said since October 7th, never call me a progressive again. Don't ever lump me with any of those groups. I have nothing in common with them, apparently. I, of course, support the right to protest in the United States, a peaceful and peaceable assembly to petition. Absolutely, it is part of our traditions, our heritage. I cherish it. And if you're going to openly support terrorists while masking your face and hiding who you really are, I find that to be despicable behavior. I believe that this idea that Palestinians haven't had since 1947 to find peace with their neighbors, the Jews in Israel, and every single opportunity, instead of finding peace, they choose war and violence. I'm not saying all Palestinian people, of course. And clearly there are innocent civilians who are dying and suffering at the hands of the military fascist religious extremists that use human shields, that put their rockets in refugee tents, in hospitals. They build tunnels under schools, and they take money that is meant for the people, the civilians in those areas, and use it for terror. I think the moral clarity is missing from many on my side of the aisle. It's not the majority, though. I really think that is a minority group that's very vocal, very loud, that you sometimes find on the right as well. Those little extremist minorities can be very vocal. But yeah, I think that both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, for that matter, should not hesitate to say with absolute clarity, Israel absolutely has a right to exist. They have a historical right to exist. They have a modern right to exist. If you bother understanding history at all and studying facts, you'll know what the history is of that region and what the reality is of the surrounding nations and what they did in 1948. And by the way, if you're just going to focus on 1948, you're absolutely ignorant of history as well. There was a slaughter in Hebron in 1929 of raping, murdering, dismembering Jews for being Jewish in the place where the tomb of the fathers and the mothers are in Hebron. And it's just ridiculous anytime to kowtow and bend over and pretend to give space for people whose ultimate goal is to murder everyone who does not believe what they believe. I do not support genocidal terrorists in any way, shape, or form. I don't support ethno-superiorities either. I mean, so white supremacists, whatever, none of them. I want us to live in peace. I want us to, work toward those goals. But that means that people who want to kill you for who you are, not what you've done, who you are, have no place in my tent.
I agree with you. Boy, somebody tell Kamala that. I think she wants to win Michigan, though, so that might be the problem. My last question for you hits right home to you because it's in California. I'm really curious what your take is on this. I reported about it a couple of weeks ago when I saw it was going to be passed in your Democrat supermajority state of California, but offering housing assistance and down payment assistance to the undocumented. Obviously, that's going to be on the table. And I want to play a clip from one of your fearless leaders in California, former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Not only does she agree with this housing assistance for the undocumented, she thinks maybe they shouldn't be undocumented anymore. Let's take a listen.
The California lawmakers just passed a law. It hasn't been signed by Governor Newsom, but giving government assistance to undocumented immigrants to buy houses. That's kind of a different place than the Democratic Party used to be on immigration. I'm not going to say that's what the country's going to do, but that's certainly where California is.
Well, let me just say, immigration had always been a bipartisan issue. I refer you to
But not free houses.
Well, that's not free housing. It's the American dream being available to more people. California's always in the lead. Maybe others will follow that lead, but that's up to those states. But we are very blessed here with beautiful diversity.
So you'd vote for this law?
Excuse me?
So you'd vote for this law?
Well, I'm not familiar with exactly what it is, but making the American dream of home ownership available to all people is something we have to do for people who are here now.
This is before you're a citizen. This is undocumented. This is for the undocumented.
Well, what I would like to do is move them to documented.
So she's not familiar with a bill that I'm familiar with, and I don't live in California anymore. I find that hard to believe she's unfamiliar with it. But, your state, once again, is going to lead the nation in coddling illegal immigration, down payment, housing assistance to undocumented folks. Do you agree or disagree?
I have a lot of challenges with it. I do want to talk about the bigger picture for a half a second, like Nancy Pelosi did there. And it's a bipartisan problem. Both parties have had many opportunities to come up with solutions and answers. I've been talking about this issue for 25 years. We need to have functioning work visa programs. There's examples in agriculture where Americans aren't taking the jobs even when they offer 25 and 30 bucks an hour. That was in Florida agriculture, Southeast United States. So there are jobs where we want immigrant labor to do the work. We grew up in the Midwest. I remember station wagons driving up in the spring to work in the cornfields and the soybean fields of Minnesota. And then they would go back home in the fall to spend their winters in Mexico or wherever else they were from. But I do remember specifically Mexican license plates on some of those station wagons. We have gotten to a place where not knowing who is in our country is totally unacceptable. It's terrible for national security. And we have a real need for some of the lower wage workers to come here and do the jobs. Do I believe that we should give them housing for that? No. But what we can do is we can enforce that some of these employers provide sufficient housing for when they come here and work. And this is why we need, like I said, functioning visa programs. Don't tell me, oh, we have visa programs. I need functioning ones. We can solve these problems, but it becomes a political hot
But Ethan,
potato.
can California solve
Yeah.
this problem? I mean, you guys already are not in the great place budgetarily. Gavin Newsom even underestimated your own budget deficit. You've got more illegal immigrants in California than anywhere else in the country. You also have more homelessness than anywhere else in the country. This program was introduced in 2023 and it ran out of money in 11 days. There's actually no money for this current program. It ran out in 11 days. And now they want to expand it to illegal immigrants, undocumented, as y'all like to say. I mean, that's not sustainable. There's no reason that the American taxpayer should be footing the bill for housing assistance for undocumented immigrants when American citizens and Californians can't afford housing. Like, you have to see the problem with that.
Yeah, and I think that you just pointed out that is the key problem. We have a horrific homelessness problem that has not been fully addressed. I know steps are being taken, but it's going to take a long time. I actually really support what Mayor Karen Bass is doing here in the city of Los Angeles right now. She's actually making efforts and steps in the right direction. It's never happening fast enough for anybody. I will be voting against George Gascon here in the DA race. I totally do not support him. I think he's been absolutely wrong in his approach in Los Angeles. But I think what you're finding is the pendulum is swinging back toward kind of traditional democratic values, which is, look, we do care about people. We do care about homeless people. We do care about undocumented immigrants. We care about LGBTQ rights. We also care about some fiscal sanity. And when we don't have enough housing, we're already short 3 million units of housing. To say that we're going to focus on undocumented immigrants, I don't want them to be homeless either. And I do want to make sure that we have enough housing so we don't have people living on the streets. But to make that a priority, I think is out of order. And we have to focus on the people who are here first. By the way, I also am on the board of a group called the Community Veteran Justice Project, where we help veterans who interact with law enforcement. We help get them housing. We help get them the mental health care that they need. We obviously are always looking for donations, cvjp.org. But the point is, we have to help those who we're supposed to help first, and we have to help everybody else when we can. So one of these days you'll invite me back and I'll tell you who I'm supporting for our governor race to replace Gavin Newsom in 2026, Tommy. But look, I always love the opportunity to talk with you and your audience. Like I said, I know we've known each other for a long time and we've always had good conversations. So, anytime you want me back, if I'm available, I'll be here.
Well, I always appreciate your take. You sound like you are, one of those sane Democrats who believes that Americans should possibly come first. I wish that California would return to some kind of a sane position on that, but that Democrat supermajority, they're just passing a lot of crazy things here, and this is the latest, probably not the most radical, more radical to come, I'm sure. But I appreciate your sanity on the issue. I hope more Democrats will listen to you because it seems like you're on the right track. Thanks so much, as always, for joining me. I know you're a busy man, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Tommy. See you later.
See you later. All right, along those same lines. 49ers first-round draft pick and rookie wide receiver Ricky Pearsall was shot during an attempted robbery in San Francisco's Union Square by a 17-year-old thug. Just another day in lawless California. It's time for final thoughts. Lawless San Francisco, nestled in lawless California, isn't a safe place for anyone, including 49ers rookie wide receiver Ricky Pearsall, who spent Labor Day weekend recovering from a gunshot wound to the chest, a gunshot he sustained during a robbery attempt in San Fran's Union Square. Reportedly, a 17-year-old thug attempted to jack his Rolex watch, and when Ricky fought back, the thug shot him and then tried to flee before being detained by police. But due to the fact that the thug, or I guess thuglet in this case, is only 17, he will more than likely go through the juvenile court. And given big boy court is already as soft as a baby's bottom in California, who knows how much time, if any, he'll really do for his crime. For those fortunate enough to be unfamiliar with San Francisco, Union Square is not the ghetto. It's not a rough neighborhood, or at least it shouldn't be, given it's a trendy area home to boutique hotels and high-end retail shops. But because it's still in California, well, it's not safe either. Not even at 4 p.m. in broad daylight, which is when Ricky Pearsall got shot. But I gotta hand it to the liberal media in California for attempting to spin this incident. Instead of questioning why San Fran's Union Square is unsafe during broad daylight, even for a big buff NFL wide receiver, the San Francisco Chronicle decided to put out an article questioning whether Pearsall should have resisted the attempted robbery at all. This isn't actually surprising, given a good many San Francisco locals already leave their windows rolled down and car doors unlocked to prevent the smash before the grab. It's advised in that hellhole to just forfeit your things. Thugs are gonna thug and face little to no consequences, so why not just oblige them, right? Why would anyone want to live there? Keep in mind, the city of San Francisco has been run or led by very high-ranking and high-profile Democrat politicians such as Gavin Newsom, Nancy Pelosi, and none other than VP and presidential hopeful Kamala Harris. They've done such a great job with the place, haven't they? But have you noticed that most cities run by a supermajority of Democrats are that way? Must be a giant coincidence. And those are just my final thoughts. Please be sure to tune in tomorrow again live at 1 p.m. Eastern. Also catch full episodes of this show on Fox Nation at your leisure. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you never miss a beat. I will be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.